Deep down, within each of us, we have the full potential of the genius we all are. Some artists are firmly connected to this infinite potential. Let us be inspired, empowered, and transformed by those who carry seeds of metamorphosis in their art.
Hello, beautiful people. I'm Eva Sanders, a songwriter and a singer, and the creator of the series of inspiring interviews with visionary artists. Today, it is my greatest honor to present you a very talented, sensitive, and unique songwriter and a singer. His beautiful music has already touched the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even more, on the five continents. He is committed to bring harmony, peace, and kindness to the world through his creativity and his performances. He has been invited to the United Nations in New York City 3 times as a musician and as a speaker. He sang one of his songs for the 90th birthday of the Hay House founder Louise Hay. This is how I discovered him. Mm-hmm. I am so pleased to welcome Paul Luftenegger.
I'm so grateful to be here, Eva. Thank you so much for asking me to.
Thank you for being with us today. So I'd like to ask you the first question. This is a very special situation in the world.
Yes.
It has never been seen like this. We are locked down globally.
Well, this is the first, actually, I wanted just to share, this is actually the first interview I've done, actually, I think properly this year, actually. So, and also during this time. So I'm grateful to be here with you.
Okay, beautiful. So how this current situation and the lockdown changed your life, and how do you keep your energy, kindness, and love high these days?
Great question. First of all, for everyone in the world, I was saying just the other day that this is the first world event we've had since 9/11. So we're going back, that was pretty much almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago. So I think we're in a time right now that's a global event. I don't think we've had one of these like this in my lifetime, not like this. So for me, I think the biggest thing that is happening is it's a time to really be reflective. I see it as a reset button, almost like a start over again button. And I think it's also bringing out many people's fears, and everything that is truth is rising to the surface right now is what I see. So it's a moment where the world is sort of questioning, I think, ultimately the news. I think for the first time in my life, I've always questioned the news for a long time, but I think it's become a lot more mainstream where people are asking questions as to who's really behind the storyline in news and media. As a singer, I also have to contact media, so I know things about the media that I've been reflecting on for a long time, and I know for sure this time is a time, I think, ultimately for everyone to understand that we have to sort of take back our own power. And I think this time is that time. And I think we're all in very good positions. What I love to always remind people of more now than ever before is that we are the news today. The actual everyday home user on a computer, we have the ability to influence the world by what we share socially, by how we expand a story through our own life. And we are all becoming editors of our own, I think ultimately our own ingestion of information. And that also includes the consciousness that we put out into the world through our social media. And it's really important for us to remember that we are very powerful in what we actually can put out to the world. And it's important that we be mindful about what we post online. I personally like to ask people to post positive, kind, loving information. But at the same time, if something needs to be said that is truth, I also think it's important to share that as well. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, and so how do you keep your vibes up and your kindness and love up these days when there is so much fear all around?
Yeah. So the first thing that I do, and I've been doing this, so I've been in a spiritual practice faithfully and consistently for just over 9 years. Every single day, I have a mantra to follow my heart. So I believe in becoming love, expanding love. And you're either expanding or contracting. I choose to use my energies constructively. I choose choices that are from my heart, not from my head. If I get into my head, I remember every morning to bring in divine love and go to my heart. And I say the longest journey one will ever take is from the head to the heart, but you have to live in the heart. And the heart is where the North Star of your, I think ultimately your life's purpose lives. And I expand that every day. So I have a pretty good spiritual practice, and I've been prepared for this. I think, some people might be new to this. I know I've heard lots of people share for the first time they're sort of having to deal with, being locked up and not able to move around much. For me, live a pretty solitary existence when I'm not in the world. So I'm used to sort of being in my own space. So what I do every day is I start the day off before I get out of bed and I go to God every single day. And I go to God first to just wash over me. And I start the day sort of in a meditative space. There's a really powerful thing in the morning that happens before you get out of bed. So laying in that space, really washing your inside out and really being just to see what flows through you in that morning space is how I start every day. And I start off every day blessing my water. I make coffee every morning. I bless my water. And on the way to the water, I basically say today is a day I'm glad to rejoice in it. And knowing that good will come from it. And I bless my water with all of my intentions for the day. And then I make coffee. And then I drink the first drink with my intentions. And I've done that for 9 years. And it's very important because I think the first energy in the morning sets the tone or the energy for the day. So that's my way. And then I meditate.
That's beautiful. Tell me, how did you start this spiritual practice? Did your parents show you, or how did it come to you?
So if you want to look into Dr. Masaru Emoto's work, this is where this started. I think some of that, and also too, I think ultimately, I've always followed my own guidance in my spiritual practices. I have a team on the other side that I work with very clearly. And I feel like we have this relationship with ultimately what we would call heaven, God, the divine space or the holy space. And I think it's important to sort of figure out what that is from within yourself to that space. And that, call that God, call that the universe, and that relationship to thin the veil with your own discernment. That's been my spiritual practice always since my dad died, which was in 2011. And I've followed, when you start following your heart, things show up for you. So that's what I would say to that.
Okay, so what's interesting, you started your regular spiritual practice in 2008,
2011.
And
Yep.
that's the same very year your first EP came out.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So is it connected?
Yes.
And how much? Because what I don't know, I tried to research a bit about your life. It was not that easy. I found some information on your website. And what I feel, you probably was first a musician and then the spirituality came in. Is it? How was it for you?
Yeah, so that's a really good way to look at it. I've always had this calling to be a priest. And it's interesting because I've always been with God. I was raised Catholic. So I was very involved with my spiritual Catholic sort of life, if you will, all my life. I was, baptized and did all of those things like First Communion and then confirmation, etc. So I grew up sort of in that spiritual sort of, I guess, structure. But I was always a musician throughout all of that. But what's sort of funny is I started to get scared of music at some point around probably when I was in grade 6. So I started to listen to people's voices saying to me things like, you know, you'll never make money with the arts, blah, 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 those stories, right? And then you start to believe them. I was one of those people that was very naive and believed everything that people told me. So going into my life, I started to sort of reduce my music. And what's sort of interesting is I started to follow the corporate ladder of the, you know, the life to work in an office and run a call center. And I worked for Hewlett Packard and did all of those things. And when I was 33, turning 34, we were just about to open a really big business. And my father hung himself and died. He was 56 years old. So in that time, what happened to me is, it's sort of the weirdest morning I've ever had in my life, because it was the most angelic morning. We didn't know my father was literally hanging at that time. So the first morning part of that day was the most beautiful day I've ever had in my life. And I felt angels literally all around us. I can't explain it. And I know from that moment was a little pause to understand the angelic space. I think the vibration or frequency. And then what happened is it went from that angelic space to horrendous nightmare. And it went from these two extremes. And I woke up in front of the mirror. And what's really interesting is every single day from that moment that my dad died, I have been with God, and I prayed to God that morning, and God came to me and whispered beautiful messages to me, actually, that I was going to be okay, that there would be blessings that come from this. And I was very, very traumatized seeing my father hanging. But God was with me every single step of the way through my grief, and asked me, which is really interesting. I hadn't played the piano for probably about 10 years, really, to go and sit down at the piano. And every single thing from that moment forward was just following God's guidance. And I didn't, for the first time, care about the outside world. Like, it was the first time that I didn't care about, there was literally, I think that year there was a tsunami, and I was so traumatized by the world that I was so insular in that moment with God. And God asked me to start playing music and writing songs for God. And at first I denied it, and I was like, oh no, 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 no. And then what's really interesting is you can deny it all you like, and it will never settle. And so God just kept leading me down this path. And I don't even know how, I don't remember writing some of my music. It was very meditative, and I became a vessel, is really what I think happens. And I opened myself up to God, and God flowed through me and out my hands. And just here we are today, 9 years later, and it's pretty wild, really.
Wow. So was it like first part of your creativity was like going through this grief? So I think it was
Huge grief, massive grief.
It was very therapeutic for you.
Yeah, it was all. So this is the thing about grief. What I didn't know then that I know now is that it's a process that is very much a gift. I think that what happens when someone dies is you're very close to heaven. And I think if you're sensitive, which I know I am, I think most musicians are pretty sensitive, because we are very in tune with our hearing and vibrations and frequencies. So we have this ability to tap into stuff that's a little bit more, I think, amplified than some. We feel our heart, we understand vibrations. So when my dad died, I felt the vibration of heaven that day. I knew it. And I've always been intuitive. I've always been sort of interested in psychics and mediums, and I've had many experiences with God all my life. But when my dad died, I think this is the thing, is I think it helped me understand to tap into that, almost like a plug that you plug into. And this is where it starts to flow. So I think that, musicians, I think, have this extraordinary talent and gift from God to tap into vibrations and frequencies. So I don't even know what I'm talking about, aside from that's where that went.
And so you told me that at the beginning of your life, you bought into all these lies, like you cannot make your living as an artist, as a musician.
Yes.
How did it transform since you started to make music?
Yeah, so we're in a really interesting time with music. This is a very big question. So long story short is, I think that we're in a time where we have to sort of, as musicians, we have to have our hands in some different things, right? we all know this if we're musicians, if we're doing the arts in any way. I think what happens is it starts to expand. You know, the more you sort of share with the world, the more the world shows up. So here's the thing. I don't make all of my money from music. I've been in business all my life in some capacity, so I know how to make money in other areas. We actually sell food, which is really helpful. I always say feeding people is very spiritual. So we've been doing that for a long time. So that sort of does a lot of the financial part of my needs. But the thing that I want to say is I think with music, we're in a time where we as musicians and also, you know, people that are in the conscious communities, music hasn't really been valued from a financial perspective properly for a very long time, since the 1960s, in my opinion. And I think that people need to start understanding that music is a very important part of the world. And musicians that create good music that is, you know, takes a lot of skill, a lot of practice, is a lifelong journey. And I say this to anyone that watches or, you know, supports. I think just music is important, and we need to start speaking up for it as creators of music, because the world is very much defined by the musicians in the world. And this is important for everybody to start taking responsibility for. And if you think music should be free, in my opinion, you're not really being fair. And I think it's important consciously, if you want to receive wealth and prosperity, you have to give. And I think music has been undervalued. And I think it's very important to support artists that actually are creating good music. So anyone out there that hasn't been purchasing music, I say to you, is that really conscious? And is that really right? And you know in your heart that if you're getting something for free that you used to pay for, there's something wrong with that. And I think that the more we start speaking about this consciously, the better off our world will be, because when you support good music and good artists that create good product to help people in their inner space, because that's where music comes from, then the world starts doing better. And I think our world isn't doing so well right now, in my opinion. And I think a lot of that has to do with music.
Wow, thank you for bringing this up. Actually,
Yeah.
I didn't know about your condition, and for me, you are just a full-time artist sharing with the world beautiful, empowering, soothing music.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, you should be paid 100% for your art.
Yeah.
100%.
It's interesting too, because people write me all the time and they want to use my music for free. And I always say yes. But the thing that I think is important is that I also think that people need to understand that we need to have a different structural understanding of what music is. And the reason why there's performance rights is so that the musician doesn't have to starve. And musicians should not be starving in our world. I think that actually, if you wanted to really fix a large part of the world's problems, you would start supporting musicians that are conscious, that do really care about this planet. And nothing, you know, if you take a movie and take away music, the movie has no feeling. So I just think that it's really important to understand the arts actually are what sort of make life livable. And music's a huge part of that. I can't imagine a world without music. And I think that right now we've done a great disservice by only having basically top 100 artists, because there's a lot more than 100 people that can write music. And I think we need to really start thinking about who owns music in the capacity of record labels, stations, you know, music stations. These are all questions that we have to start getting to the core root of, and also our performance rights engines that are in the world. I'm a member of SOCAN, which is in Canada, but this is all needing to be sort of worked on together. So all of us musicians need to unite together and start having conversations about what our needs are and actually demanding them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. So you asked a big question.
Totally agree. Let us go for this. It's really important. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, let us see a little bit your artist life. Uh, so it was pretty clear this impulse in 2011 to create music, and
Hmm.
you probably already got this impulse to do conscious music that elevates, that empower, that is filled with
Yep.
kindness, love, peace, respect, which is so needed in this world. My God, this is just. I just wish for a world that is completely filled with it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's great. At the same time, did you have periods in your artistic life where you were like hesitating? Did I take the right path? Is it
Mm.
worthy what I do? Uh, I imagine you have been rejected thousands of times, as like everyone.
Yeah, I know, right?
So tell us a little bit about, yeah.
Okay, so first of all, being rejected is an interesting space. So I've been laughed at. I've been, ridiculed by some of my family. I've had, I think us musicians, ultimately what we have to do is become vulnerable. We share our hearts and we put it out to the world for judgments. And at the first start, when I first started doing this, I was way too involved in my ego. And I realized that, after I started releasing music. But what's sort of interesting is I always made it about me. And music really isn't about me. It's actually about something so much bigger than me. As the musician, I'm a vessel. And I can safely say the old me could never finish a song. I could always start a song, I could get halfway done. And then the message that would come to me is the music that you will write, you need to go and live in the world before you write it. So, what is a musician without really good experiences of life or wisdom? It's not really great music, actually, in my opinion. So, for me, I was really annoyed at that when I was 19. I became quite angry, actually, at God, I'll be very frank, sort of pissy about it. And I took a year off to try to write music, and then I gave up on it. And I left it, and I said, fine, I'm done. And what's really interesting, I didn't expect the way that it happened to happen for me. And it came out of sort of left field. And it was the only thing that actually helped me heal after my dad died. And it was also sort of this weird relationship with God in a way that I needed to serve the world and myself to heal. And this sort of ebb and flow started to happen. So my biggest sort of rejection to music was when I was probably about 20. And then what's sort of interesting, moving through this the next 9 years of my life, the last 9 years of my life, I always say that God presents solutions to problems, and sometimes we're not really willing to listen. I think listening is really, really important. And I think that human beings don't do a very good job of listening. And I think us musicians, we need to remember that really to create music, we have to sort of become reflective and listen to how something will come to life. So every album I've had has been so different how it came to life, what was happening around that time globally, and also so the macro and the micro. And I think musicians are reflective sort of by nature. So that's what music becomes. It becomes a reflection of human experience. And I think that's why music is so important, because it gives an emotion to a current event. So when I write, I'm very much aware of what's going on in the world, as well as my life, and sort of bringing to life something that is inside of me, but I think in everyone in the collective. So that's sort of my process. And I think that ultimately, we're sort of in this beautiful space of a new beginning. I think for musicians to really be able to create, I don't think music costs as much money as it used to create, which is wonderful. And on the flip side of that, there's a lot of people that are making music that aren't so good at it, quite frankly. Yep.
Yeah. So let us see a technical question. Do you produce all your music? Do you create lyrics,
Yeah. Yeah. So
melody, arrangements?
Yeah. So everything that I've ever done is me. The thing that I always like to say is I do have a producer now, and I've had one on my last 5 albums. Um, the thing that's very important to me is that the end result has to be perfect, and as perfect as it can be. I love imperfection, so this is just sort of my feeling on my own art that I want to put out. But I think it's very important to have. I produced the first 2 albums on my own, and I realized my strengths and my weaknesses. And the thing that's very important for me is that music is produced with myself as well as someone that understands the recording aspect of things. Because if you don't have a good quality product in sound, it's almost, I would feel guilty. It's really the answer. And I think the listener, when you put in earbuds, it's very, very important to have a space that is very zen. And in order to do that properly for me, you need to pay someone that's so, my producer is like, he can hear things that I can't even perceive. And when he goes through it, we do it together. And when he goes through it, he picks things out I would never hear. And then as soon as he does, he's like, no, listen. And he fixes the things that I can't hear. And then when he does, the end result is like this beautiful, I think, ultimately feeling or vibration of perfect peace in music. So that's sort of why I have a producer. But everything else, like writing or arranging what I want, I always have all of that sort of as part of what I do. And I just sort of direct him for the most part, and he puts his little flair in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like
he's amazing too.
Yeah, it's like
his name is Arun Chaturvedi or Arun Chaturvedi. Yeah.
It's like taking abilities of someone else who is much farther than you are, and then to bring higher your music in order just to give it the best chance to be the best for everyone.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, one of the things that just came to my heart to share is it's really funny. When I first started, I will never forget this either. I will always remember this. The first time I met him, I remember I had played the piano. I had brought my keyboard and I had played the piano on the first track or second track that I had like shown him live when we were doing our recording. And I said, so I'd like you to actually play the piano. And he looked at me and he said, what? He said, you are one of the most beautiful piano players I've ever heard because you don't have any filler, is what he said. And I remember for the first time, I always thought I was sort of a crappy piano player, to be quite honest. And I remember sort of being surprised that he wanted to use my piano. And then when I listen to my music now, it's actually sort of what has set me apart in a different sort of way, because I don't have lots of filler in my piano parts. They're very simple and very specific and concise. And actually, it's really funny because when he tries to play the way that I play, he can't. So it's actually sort of funny because he's an amazing piano player, but very different than me. So I'm very grateful that what happens is I think it puts an extra aspect of myself in my music, which I never really thought I needed, but it's the most important part. So yeah, I'm very grateful for his intelligent sort of, he knew me better than I knew myself.
Well, no one will play better your music than you.
Mm-hmm.
No one.
Well said.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Let us see your inner artist. What does inspire you, and how do you nourish your inner artist?
Well, first of all, life inspires me. Humanity, when humanity gets along, inspires me. And I think most importantly, God inspires me. The miracle of life is the most miraculous thing there is. And I just think that we very seldom realize how miraculous all of the things that go on around us truly are. And I always like to go to space to be inspired, because if you just think about it, we're in the middle of infinity, surrounded by all these planets that rotate at exact positioning around this massive big fireball, and somehow life exists and we're a part of it. And that just starts my whole, that's amazing. So that's always, I go to space and to God and to human beings and the miracle of life itself being born.
How do you create a new project? How do you have an idea of an album? And then when you have an idea, do you start by writing lyrics, or is there any melody coming to you? How the creative process?
Yeah, so they've been different for everyone. You have to find your own way. For me, I can speak to what I'll talk about, like sort of my last project. I feel very much that when it's time to write an album, it's almost like I know that I'm pregnant and I have something that I need to give birth to. It's very much a birthing, and I have to be pregnant for however long that is. And right now, the last project I did actually, I was in the studio in December of 2018. And I finished actually really right after Christmas. I wrote and made it all happen around Christmas. I wanted the energy of the 12th month to be in that last album, Seeds of Peace, which was like a complete cycle for me. And I'm very particular about how I'm so picky about the timing, how it comes together, and the time I need to get it ready. And then what's really interesting is on the last album, I was going through a really intense experience. One of my dear friends was very, very, very ill with brain cancer, and he died. I'll never forget this. He died the morning I finished recording, and I can't explain this. It's like I knew he was waiting for me to finish, and he had also invested in that album. So he was such a huge part of the Seeds of Peace album, and it's really interesting how the way life works and the genius of how it all comes together in an album, because there's an energy and a frequency. I always call music an endless infinite love battery if you do it right, and everybody's energies in it that you've ever met, that you've ever sort of been in an experience with, if you do an album properly. And what's really interesting is then it's given to the world, and then the energy of the future gets put into it. And I see it sort of do this every time. And it's beautiful because it never stops generating more of what the intention that went into it was. And I love that about it. It's magical to see.
Yeah, I love your album Seeds of Peace. I just
Yeah, thank you. That was a really special one for me.
Yeah,
And I think, I'm sort of interested. People have been writing me like they're ready for my next album, and I have to be ready first. But I also trust that I'm being told it's time to start considering it. So yeah, it's a lot of work to do an album. I'm a bit lazy right now.
Well, maybe that's a period of gestation, just to
Yeah,
be open,
just to be.
to be definitely.
Yeah.
Well, you are not as passive as it because at the beginning of April 2020 you released the single "The Word 5T"
Yes.
on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
What is it for you, "The Word 5T"? How do you?
So this is sort of an interesting song that I just put out properly with a video, just really simple. So this album that I did with Anita Morjani, I don't know if anyone knows. Do you know Anita Morjani?
No.
No? Okay. So Anita Morjani is a New York Times bestselling author. It's really a funny story because...
is she one? She wrote a book about
Yes.
dying. Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
so it's a near-death...
I read it a few years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
So it's a near-death experience.
Yeah.
So back in 2014, I was living in London, England, releasing my first big album from England. And it was very interesting. We were living in a beautiful place just outside of Notting Hill. And it was really that dream sort of releasing an international album from London, England. So I was having all these interviews online all over the world and sort of living this dream to life, which was sort of scary, actually. And I was really nervous about things. And what's really interesting, at the end of that year of 2014, Anita had written me a Twitter, and she was a huge fan of my music. And what's really funny is she asked me, she was coming to my hometown. I was living in London, England. I'm from a place in Canada called London. So sort of a mirror image, kind of weird. And she wrote me this tweet and asked me to perform at her show in my hometown. So I decided to leave London, England, move back to Canada to share the stage with her, which was a pretty big decision. So we did that. And so it was in May that I performed in 2015 with her, on the 24th of May, I believe it was. And what's really interesting is that time we had a meal right after, and we had this talk over a lunch the next day after I shared the stage with her. And I basically worked out this situation where I had this gut feeling to release an album in reflection of her book. And I did that year. So I worked on that album and released it actually in December. And one of the songs on that was a vision that I had of the world 5D. And the fifth dimension is where we live from the heart. That's really ultimately what that is to me. And I think that we're in a time where we're starting to understand that, where we leap forward with our evolution. And the 5D world is where we get to shower the world with peace and love, with our intentions and our full, whole, highest self and manifest. And the heart really is where that comes from. And that's what the song's all about. But it's from that album, but I released it. I knew 2020 is, I think that we're in 5D right now. If we really step back and stop being scared, stop being in fear, and we go to our heart, I think that we're living, heaven comes to life when we realize we're in heaven. Where we treat people with the golden rule, where we treat people the way we want to be treated, when we treat people with the namaste, I honor you because I know you honor me. You matter, I matter. This balanced sort of way is from the heart. And so I think that we're the ones we've been waiting for once we realize that we can live from the heart. And that's where I think the heaven, it was shown when my dad died that the gates of heaven are through an open heart. And I think that's what the World 5D as a song is really about. And it's a special one for me, that one.
So is it a kind of a vision you have for this year, 2020, and for all the years that will come after the lockdown?
Yes, it is. And the thing that I see in this is I think it's time to finally see. And 2020 vision is perfect vision. And I think we have sacred technologies within us that have been waiting for us to become very aware of them, to stop being judgmental about them. The sixth sense, I remember when I was a kid, people used to sort of laugh at that. The older I've gotten, it's become a lot more interesting and a lot more people understand it. And we're living in a time where we have a sixth sense, not a question to me. I follow my intuition every day, and that's how I'm here with you. And that's how I know people all around the world, and how I have fans in pretty much every country. And I followed my intuition with God, and I listened, and I acted, and I took action toward that. And I think that, I always say that, I'm very open about this. I'm a medium. I also think everybody has the ability to tap in and be a medium. I don't think I'm unique. I think I just use my inner technologies. My father, when he died, I realized that, it's just a change of state. The person doesn't really go away in the sense of going away. Yes, physically, but his presence is more alive now than he ever was when he was alive on earth. And he's taught me that there's a relationship that goes on through the veil. And I think that we look at death as a final completion, and that's a mistake. Death is a continuation because life doesn't end, it's energy. And so my father is very much alive to me, more now than ever before. And he's taught me this sort of space through the veil. So I just think we're living in a time where we need to start looking at all of our sacred inner technologies. And I think music is one of the very, very important ways to do that.
Definitely, music is here to open our hearts.
Yes, and to get inside of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for me, you are already living in this 5D world with your morning practice of reconnecting with yourself, allowing God to shower you, setting your intention, creating conscious music, bringing kindness, peace, harmony, beauty into the world. And I'm just so grateful you took this time to answer my questions. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you.
And I just be blessed and keep creating music and sharing it with the world. And I pray your music is also valued financially because you just deserve it.
Yes, thank you. And I think what's really beautiful about, I think, ultimately everything that's going on right now is we're living in times where we get to sort of be the change we wish to see. And we have to remember that we're all creators. I was having this conversation with my mother before coming on here, and I think it's so beautiful with what you're doing, because I think we're starting to understand that we get to support each other. And I always see the future in the now. So it's sort of this vision. This is why meditation is so important, because we get to go sort of forward in the future and create in the now. And this space between the future and now is really important to understand. And if you're in your heart, you're going to create and co-create something that's going to help not just yourself, but someone else. And we're in these times to understand that we're in this co-creative space now where we get to sort of work with each other. We know people all around the world. We have wonderful technologies to communicate our hearts with others. And what's really beautiful is there's enough people on the planet that can support us doing what we do. And, we're all sort of figuring this out, I think, together. I always say we're not alone. We get to do this together by holding hands. And I really think it's important to just live this beautiful existence with our hearts united. And that's where telepathy, that's where telepathy really is through the heart. So I thank you for doing this too. Thank you very much, Eva.
Thank you. And we are so much looking forward to listen to your next album.
Yes, I have to get busy. Yes. It's interesting. I think I'm sort of at this point. I keep sort of wavering on this, but I'm at this point. I think my next album, and I'll say this, I think I'm at this point where I think it's going to be more, I think, prayer-like, and some prayers and chanting. And I'm going to mix in, I think, the other part that I absolutely love is, I think, sometimes just instrumentals. So, yeah, beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. And have a beautiful rest of your day, and take good care, and happy Easter.
Yeah, happy Easter to you. Thank
Yes,
you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.